Well, hello and welcome back to another installment of Disciple Makers to Live as Christ. We are now into episode number 5, I believe, of our Being Together in Ministry. And you will remember this is my lovely wife, Catherine. So today we're going to talk about emotional and spiritual health. I think, and you feel free to jump in here in a moment, it is important for us to be emotionally aware, to be spiritually aware, and also for us to be very much honest with ourselves if we're going to be serving the Lord by me being a pastor, you being a pastor's wife, and even more so because, surprise, surprise, you may now know this, I think we shared it before, we homeschool the boys. So not only are you the mother, you're the teacher, I'm the principal, and it's all kind of crazy.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Which part specifically?
Well, the opening, so
As far as emotional health?
the whole shebang, everything I just said.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of facets to it because you have an emotionally draining job and navigating that together along with the typical trials of marriage, raising kids, in addition to homeschooling them, that adds another level of complexity into how our family life works. The emotional health and the management of things and growing spiritually, I don't know if more nuanced is the right word, but there definitely has to be more structure because we're around each other so much, and you also have a job that is really emotionally draining, not always in a bad way, but helping people with their spiritual and emotional health, even for good reasons, can take a toll on someone. So, and those are things we have to really think about more.
Okay. So I agree. I think we need to be vigilant and gracious to each other. We don't always succeed at that. We can be honest about that. But we need to be mindful of who we are, how God made us, and help one another through that. With that, we can then segue into when one of us is burnt out. And the first question for us to just kind of talk about is how do we recognize burnout early? What are some of the telltale signs when we are burnt out?
I think it's hard because we're so used to being such go-getter type of people. I think you and I both are not always great at recognizing it in ourselves first. I think we'll see it in the other person more often because, we're looking from the outside in, but I think we are just so used to getting things done and the things that need to be done. Um, it's hard to recognize it because we're busy. I know that when you start to seem burnt out or more drained, you definitely get more tired. You're exhausted. You just have no room really for anything else, mentally speaking. And sometimes that leads to more physical exhaustion anyway. And that's kind of a way you cope when you're really stressed out is you sleep, which is kind of annoying because you kind of get to like check out for a little bit and be unconscious. I kind of wish I had that. I can't do that. My mind is going a million miles an hour. But when you're particularly stressed or mentally exhausted, you'll actually sleep. And I don't know, you get like this weird reset and like you can think about it clear. But then other typical things, you might be getting a little bit more irritable, things that don't normally bother you all of a sudden. I think that's a lot with most people. You just feel that stress and you may not recognize it as burnout. And so you just tend to default to irritable more often than you might normally. So I think those are some of the ways. I don't know. I don't know for myself if I could call it burnout quite the same way, but I definitely know when I'm starting to feel overly stressed,
Right?
which is kind of leading that way. I feel more anxious about things. I feel the need to be in control of a lot of things. And so I will find ways to do that, whether it's the kids or cleaning the house or overly planning or overly talking. Like I will feel this need to control.
Right.
And that's my stress kind of putting me in this position of feeling out of control. So I will find the things I can control. I will also get more irritable, and that sometimes also leads me to not sleeping well because my mind is trying to solve all the problems that need to be solved and I can't, but it doesn't shut down. And so then I'm just kind of going and going, and that'll lead me to that sort of burnout place if I'm not careful.
I think for us, and yes, you're totally right when it comes to me, and I think you're definitely spot on with your own burnout flags. I think for us, what matters most is when it comes to recognizing burnout early, is being able to say something which, when we're in the throes of feeling overwhelmed or mentally or spiritually exhausted, or even just physically exhausted, because that's also a thing, especially here lately. We've had a number of weeks where things have been go, go, go.
Hmm.
And of course, we're on the build up to one of the big holidays for the Christian church, which would be Easter. So
Right.
good Palm Sunday. Good Friday, and then Resurrection Sunday. So definitely there's lots that goes up into that. And then there's not only the high holidays of Christian tradition, and again, not tradition for the sake of a bad word, is rather those are holidays that make our faith real and poignant to our practice. And then you also have things like special events or special gatherings, whether it's church, family, etc.
Right.
Those things will then also begin to weigh us down. Even good things can become burdensome things, and not
Right.
in a bad way. It just it piles on you. There's responsibility and things of that nature. That leads us to the follow-up question to that is, what does support look like in practical means? Like, what are some of the things that we can do that help each other to lessen burnout? So, for example, let's start with you in particular. To help you out, what are some things that really help you deal with burnout?
So, what often tends to help me is one of the big things is I feel like I need to clear my mind. And usually that is in the form of talking things out. 9 times out of 10, I will answer my own questions or solve my own problems in that way, but it feels jumbled up in my head. And so I need to be able to just like word vomit everything in my brain, and then I'm like, okay, I got all the extra fluff out that needed to happen. So now I can put back the things clearly in the right order that need to go back in. And I offloaded the rest of this. You find that incredibly annoying sometimes because you're like, woman, get to the point already. But
You know, if I can be honest, I'm thinking right now as you're saying that, I'm thinking of Pastor Mark Gongor's. It's on YouTube. It's called "The Tale of Two Brains," men's
yes,
brains, women's brains. I'm picturing this big bowl of spaghetti.
that's
That's all I'm thinking of.
That's what it feels like, yes. And so sometimes that helps a lot. The other thing that can help with the burnout is in part of clearing out my mind, I have constant mental checklists going. And normally that's not a big deal. But when we have added extra things or things on that list that are really, really stressful and they're taking a lot of my mental energy or emotional energy or whatever, then having the minor things like done that I don't have to think about getting done are helpful to me, especially things that maybe I don't do often or don't occur to me because I'm worried about, these things I have to do every day. And so if there are like outliers that can get done, it helps me when those things can get done and I'm not having to organize it or I'm not having to ask for it or whatever. It can just be done and I can say, okay, so and so is taking care of that. I'm done. That's a thing off my brain. It can go off my list and I'm not having to also plan that other thing. And they may not even be big things. It could be very small things, but they're just things on a list. And so when those things come off, it can help me shift my energy and feel a little less overwhelmed. So those are probably the biggest things because my mind doesn't stop. Even if I get to quote unquote sit down and rest or do something relaxing, the mind keeps going for me. And that's where I get the most exhausted.
I can see that. And I've seen that. You're really improving. I think for me, the biggest thing has been um, number one, overstimulation is one of those things that lets me know, hey, I'm maxing out.
Yes.
And you've seen that because when I get home, I need to be kind of separate for it for a while. And sometimes that's a complaint or just an observation. Hey, you cannot just check out. You need to be here. And I agree. But for me, that's one of those things that tell me I am maxing out to my mental capacity. So that when that happens, what helps me is because we live in a beautiful place called the East Mountains of New Mexico, we have the scenic byway, which is Highway 14. And so I like going for a walk just on the sidewalk that follows the highway. And so walk between where we live to a local coffee shop called Cabra Coffee. And that's about round trip 5 miles, just going for a walk, come back. Takes me usually about an hour and 40 minutes at the most. And I am able to just listen to music, listen to scripture, listen to a book, sometimes just silence and hearing the cars drive by. And that helps me to decompress. It's a real practical thing that I can do so that I can just have some physical activity that just kind of works that out of me. Two, it allows me the mental space to just not be engaged with something.
Hmm.
And three, it allows me to just reset. Another thing you mentioned, and it's frustrating to you, it's the gift of sleep. And
Yes.
just ease of sleep, to be honest, is that I can, if you're driving and I'm exhausted, I can just sit back in the front seat and sleep, no problem. I can be at home. As a matter of fact, I can even confess that it was one of the big things when we lived in Texas. and we would hang out with your family, and not an insult to them, but it was more like this is a place where I can just not be on guard. And that lessening of my guard just kind of drove my body to just, now mind you, there were also some other factors there at the time where, working very long hours, and then it was a different thing, not necessarily pastoring. But I also think that support, practical support for me, is like similar to you, listening. I don't need an answer, just need you to hear me out, let
Right.
me blurb that out. Now, because in my current position as a lead elder, as a pastor, as pastor teacher, if you would, I cannot say everything that goes on in confidential gatherings, like, say, for example, elder meetings or even in counseling sessions. But I can air frustrations based on what I'm feeling, just because of what I feel, not because it's
Right.
connected to anything. Another thing that helps, and this is one of those very meaningful things that I think that help me out, is when we get home and we sit together to eat and we can just enjoy a good meal together, not thinking of anything else. The boys are sharing about their school day or about whatever game they played that day or whatever they learned. And we just get to have a very relaxing, just sharing a meal with you and the kids really blesses me out. It really helps me to just decompress. So those are some of those practical things for me. And I would say for our brothers and sisters who are watching, you need to be aware of who you are, in that everyone is similar, but you're not all the same. I mean, we may have similarities in how we cope with stress and stress factors, but you're going to be somewhat different. So you need to be aware of, okay, when I am irritable, is that because I'm tired, because something is going on at work, or what are some of your behaviors that you display when you are um, overwhelmed, overstimulated, etc. So be mindful of that. And it's okay to communicate to your parents, your significant other, your wife, your husband,
Right.
this is what I'm dealing with, and this is how you can help me.
Yeah. Well, and the communication piece is big because sometimes people, not you specifically, but people can struggle to be able to be introspective enough to see where they might be giving those signs of irritability or things that set them off. And so being able to hear that, hey, I notice when this happens, you start to get grumpy or you start to whatever it is, right? You need to be able to hear that from the other person. And the other person also needs to be able to hear, if something bothers me that you do and that stresses me out, or I feel like maybe you're not hearing where my concern is, hey, we need to have this talk, because the better we understand where our stress is and where our burnout can happen, the more we can support each other. You know what will help me, and I know what will help you.
Right.
And so there are going to be times where we're going to have to be that support for each other, because it's only whether it's a joint thing we're struggling with or a stressful situation, or it's just one or the other, we need to be able to communicate those things
Right.
to support each other
Right.
and know where those differences are.
I agree. So with that being said, this is a question I think primarily directed at me, but I think you have every reason and opportunity to share your thought. Should pastors admit exhaustion publicly?
No. I think that runs the risk of putting a burden on the church that does not exist. And you have a particular circle for that thing. That is where your elders come in, or your close friends, and or myself, your spouse if you're a pastor who's married. There is a group that you can share that with, that can help share that burden, help find where the exhaustion is coming from, and be honest about that, because they know the more intimate details of your life. Are you putting too much on yourself that really you shouldn't and could be delegated elsewhere? Is it just that stressful of a situation, or things that can't necessarily be delegated, but they can pray alongside you and comfort you, or whatever those things are? Maybe it's not church related, maybe it's family. Or maybe it's a family thing going on, and that can't be solved by the church or the elders. That is a
Right.
thing we have to work through, but they can be supportive in that. So I
Right.
would say no. I'm not saying you necessarily would have to be, Energizer Bunny all the time, but should you stand up in front of the pulpit and say, "Y'all, I'm tired, get it together because I'm getting exhausted"? Like, no, that's not the conversation you
And
have
when
from the
that
pulpit.
happens, I need to get my resume ready, and I need to have some, what do you call them, references ready to go. Well, I think we need to start with what publicly means. And I think you hit it exactly in the head. So that nail has been driven in, but I want to reinforce that.
Sure.
Number one, from a pulpit, no. And this is where we need to differentiate what publicly means. Can we be honest with people that are part of our circle? Yes. So, for example, we talked about our friends and our family. We can say, it's been a long 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It's been a long 6 to 12 weeks of non-ending ministry. I'm planning on taking some time off. Well, that is totally appropriate because you're not saying, gee, I'm totally wasted emotionally. I'm wasted physically. And if I have one more phone call today, I'm going to lose it. That's not healthy. And it also shows, number one, lack of planning on my part as the
Mhm.
elder or anyone who's a pastor elder. And it also shows that we are not taking care of ourselves emotionally on a regular basis.
Right.
So publicly from a pulpit, no. A trusted group of friends, to your point, yes. The elders, like the Vasquezes, one or two, the ones from San Antonio or the ones from South San Antonio, then definitely those are people that we can say, hey, please pray for me. It's really busy and I'm kind of running on fumes. Just pray that the Lord gives me endurance. Pray that our family seeks time together as we continue to navigate this. That is totally appropriate. I would encourage the men who are watching this, who the Lord may be calling to be pastors or maybe pastoring already. You need to have good, healthy men around you to encourage you. And your wife, by the same token, needs to have good, healthy, strong Christian women to encourage her and to support her. Usually, in a good, healthy church, that comes in the way of the elders couple, the husbands and the wives being there for one another. It also communicates in the way of some churches where they have deacons instead of elders, having deacons that are not driven by political gain or power plays, but rather who are wanting to bless the pastor and encourage the pastor
Right.
to have a healthy rhythm of ministry. That also has to do with exhaustion. If exhaustion is a constant thing, there's a number of things that need to be addressed. One, overperforming for some, overperforming for others, or underperforming on a number of scales. The biggest thing is making sure that when the work is spread evenly across everyone in the church, then exhaustion doesn't really happen. And I think for that, I can sing the praises of our current church, Vista Grande, because there's a great wealth of the members that step up to serve the men, the women, the children, and the youth, even where they all want to take part of what we all need to do to make sure ministry takes place, which then frees me up to focus on things
Right.
that are more important. And exhaustion has not been as recurrent as has been elsewhere,
And it's
which
been
is a
more
blessing.
situational, like
Right.
it's a particular season or situation that's come up, but it's not long-term exhaustion when that busy season is done or that particular situation has been resolved, however it's been resolved, then it moves on. And those happen, like that's life. You can't avoid that. But the long-term exhaustion of it just never ends or I never get caught up or what then there's bigger issues that need to be addressed.
I agree. So, yes and no. No from the pulpit, yes to your trusted circle, and make sure that it's a mutual encouragement because if you have good, faithful leaders in your church, then they will keep you from going into exhaustion.
Right.
Because, and this is something that's becoming even more apparent now in the United States, pastors are not staying in pastoring positions for longer, usually on average, right, for longer than 5 years. And not only that, but there's also a big exodus of pastors from the pastorate because of a number of factors. But
Right.
one of those that can definitely drive that further is when the pastor feels like no one is helping him for whatever reason.
Right.
Number one, brothers, we need to not be proud. We can ask for help. And if help is not forthcoming, then we can be honest with, hey, I only have so much to give. And unless you want me to go to the hospital,
Right.
I need to take care of this first.
Some things are
So,
minor and
yeah,
they just if there's no one to do it, then it doesn't get done,
that's
and
right.
that's okay.
So that's important. My next question would be this: how do we avoid spiritual guilt during dry seasons? And I guess we need to define what dry means. Are we
Yes.
talking like chicken dry or are we talking like dry rub? Because there's a difference. So go ahead.
So, are you talking spiritually dry
I
seasons?
think that's what the question is referring. Yes.
Okay, so how do we avoid spiritual exhaustion during dry seasons? Was
So
that I wanna make sure I understand.
how do we avoid spiritual guilt
Guilt.
during dry seasons?
Well, I think the question would be why is there a dry season? Is it always gonna be raining and flooding? No, not necessarily, but what is the dry season about? Is it because you have just gotten lazy with your spiritual walk? Okay, well, that's a whole nother ball of wax that needs to be dealt with.
Right.
Or is it you consider it a
Challenges.
dry season because it's either challenging or maybe it feels like a plateau in the spiritual development or growth in a certain area?
Right.
I don't know that that could be considered a dry season, even though it might feel that way. Plateaus or waiting periods are not necessarily dry seasons.
Right.
Those are like marinating
Right.
seasons. And so I think you have to be able to distinguish that. I think oftentimes, if we're talking personally dry season, then there needs to be evaluation on our personal spiritual growth and why we're dealing with that dry season. The spiritual guilt coming with that, I don't know that you could say you would even have spiritual guilt if you're really in that dry of a season because you're obviously not being invested the way you should anyway. So would you even recognize it? I mean, there's a whole lot of, I guess, psychology going into play in that one, but I think it's more likely that a pastor or pastor's family may experience spiritual guilt in a quote unquote dry season because they feel like they're not seeing the results that they should.
Right.
And that's more often where the spiritual guilt comes from. It's a slow season or we're in a waiting period when we feel like some results should be happening and they're not. And so I think that would be more a reframing of it's not necessarily a dry season. Now, if the spiritual health of your church is just kind of like that's the only word I got for it. What are
Depleted.
deeply what are
Depleted.
we there's underlying problems,
Yeah.
okay? That's a symptom of an underlying problem that's going on, and why is that going on?
Right.
And sometimes some of the root cause is the pastor. Many times it's not. Sometimes pastors us just aren't being aware. They're so busy with things. They're not focusing over here on helping with discipleship or growth tools. Now everyone's responsible for their own spiritual development, but the pastor's a tool in that. But if they're so busy running everyone ragged with this event or that event or this
Yeah. No.
planning, then you're going to lose some of that. You're not investing in them where it matters the most. Is the church having another type of struggle maybe the pastor doesn't know how to address? Maybe it's a really deep rooted long-term generational issue going on. There's a lot of factors in that. I think you'd have to know what the dry season is and why you're having it.
So if we're speaking
Think.
about emotional emotions and our spiritual health, anything could be from, say, emotional separation or
Hmm.
even a spiritual separation, not only from the Lord, but also from one another.
Right.
I think we need to have in context what Paul writes to those who are married, that a husband and a wife are not to abstain from one another, except for seasons where they need to develop their own spiritual walk with God.
Right.
And so that is not only addressing the physical intimacy, but also the spiritual intimacy and connection. It's not to say that, well, I'm going to divorce you for 6 weeks and I'm going to go on, some sabbatical type of thing, because that's not what the Bible is saying. What the Bible is conveying is there is a time for even married couples in ministry where you can say, hey, I really need to focus on this. Can you help me? And that may mean, husband, you may need to wash dishes more, help with the laundry, help make the bed in the mornings, help in the tasks that otherwise your wife would do, and vice versa. The wife can simply say, hey, I hear you, you need to focus on this, and so we're going to make sure that I'm not coming with my honey-do list every 10 minutes to remind you what's coming up. So that would be the first thing that I would address to that question. The other thing is spiritual guilt, as our listeners may hear that, is to a sense of guiltiness because of pressure from the outside. And if we understand this to be more internal instead of external, then it's going to be easier to maneuver, because it's I have to deal with me, not
Right.
with what someone else has as an opinion about me or what I'm doing. And so if we do that, number one, there's no spiritual guilt in that. Even when, say, for example, Elijah, he has this Mount Carmel experience, slaughters the false prophets of Baal, and even kills them, and so now he runs away because of this horrible queen coming for him, Jezebel, and he says, God, I alone, I'm the only one, and God says, no, you're not. There's many others who have not bent the knee to these idols. So calm down, take a nap, eat some food. So, kind of important. So, God provides us with the assurance that we're not the only ones going through this, but also that there are others that we can have faith and trust that are going to be faithful. That being said, intentionality, always be proactive, not reactive. And so that also works in the way that we take care of ourselves. Again, rhythms of ministry. There's going to be seasons that are, hey, for the next 2 weeks, like for example, leading up to Easter, hey, we need to get some things done. Means the weekends may be a little taken with things to get ready for that. However, after Easter, we can take a break and kind of reset. And
Right.
then just kind of go through the ebb and flow of ministry. It doesn't have to be program after program after program after program. What does have to happen is relationship after relationship after relationship. And even with that, people understand like, hey, this is kind of big in my plate right now. Let me get past this and then we can connect. And
Right.
people usually respond well to that. I know you've done that. The boys understand that, even though they're younger than 10, all of them. And even the members of the congregation appreciate when you show them that one, you're human, and two, you're willing to admit your own limitations, but at the same time, you're willing to be there for them, unless it's something extremely critical, like someone is in the emergency room, the ICU, or someone has passed away.
Right.
Any other thoughts on that? So we're going to then segue to staying emotionally connected. And there's 4 questions that will help us kind of discuss this and how we have done this, whether well or poorly, and where have we seen improvement. Number 1, how do we avoid emotional isolation?
I think we've learned that the hard way, and we've had to really work through that because after we had our very big first church hurt issue when you were pastor,
Hmm.
with our very first church, it changed a lot of life dynamic, practically speaking, but there was a lot of emotional hurt that went with that. We had
Right.
invested into that area, that church, those people for almost
Yeah.
5 years. So there were a lot of struggles that came with that.
Right.
Um, and then, of course, life changed dramatically. We had to make a lot of changes, a lot of decisions, a lot of moves, all kinds of things. And you and I both kind of dealt with it separately and not necessarily in the best ways. And we struggled to communicate the hurt that we were feeling with each other and understand that. I think sometimes we ended up in this survival mode, not just practically speaking, but emotionally speaking.
Hmm.
We were wanting to protect our emotions. We were trying to just do what we had to do to take care of the family or get things done. And so we stopped communicating on the best level. And then as we moved through some of the practical things, the emotional stuff started to become more obvious.
Right.
And so we really had to learn how to re-talk and how to get out some of the things that were just burdening us down for so long. But we really had to learn how to kind of recommunicate and say what needed to be said without being mean, but still being honest. And the others, we also had to learn to listen to each other. We didn't always like what the other one had to say, whether it was about us or about something else. We had to still be able to listen and take it in, kind of digest it. And I think as we've worked through that the last few years, that's helped us avoid that emotional disconnect. That's not to say it still doesn't happen here and there, but the severity is not there. I think you and I both start to recognize, hey, we're kind of off kilter a little bit. We're a little more snippy with each other than we might normally be. We'll have those little seasons where we get in a fight about something ridiculous because we stop listening.
Right.
We're both wanting to answer or solve it or whatever our thing is. And so we actually stop hearing the other person. So it takes us a minute to be okay. We're actually not really listening. We have an answer already in our mind and we're not really hearing what the other person is saying. But I think we've learned to recognize that better. And that communication is really where I think we've avoided or been able to manage not being more emotionally disconnected, at least from each other.
Right. I think the best way that we have avoided emotional isolation, learning from the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the good is, at the end of the day, we are the team. So speaking just the two of us, we are the team. So we need to work on the team because the team is not going to go on a breakup tour. That's
Yeah.
not going to happen. Number 1. Number 2, I think the challenge has been being aware of just the emotional isolation potential. Before we thought, and again, the more time you're married, the more you practice this, is being aware of where we need to, oh, I didn't know that that was this. So, for example, I didn't know that me being extremely quiet was a way of coping with me feeling like I was not heard or I was being hurt emotionally. And there's other, but that's just one example.
Of that, what you didn't know, and I've had to explain, and you've heard, is when you are really, really quiet, but I'm struggling with a similar issue, it feels like you are just shutting down from me.
Right.
And I had to learn to understand that that is you processing,
Right.
but you have also had to learn that you can't process forever and then move
No.
on and not tell me that you processed. You have to give that back to me at some point.
I like to write. Writing is my outlet. It doesn't communicate to her. So that's also part of the how do we
So that's
avoid
a
these
good
things?
example.
It's being able to say, it's not just what's for me. You still have to work that out, but
Right.
also what helps bring us together. Again, going back to family lives, weekend to remember, it's seeking oneness and actually being intentional to seek that and together coming together, not just drifting apart from each other.
Right.
All right. Here's another question, and I think this one's going to be very, very good. Do pastors struggle with vulnerability at home?
I mean, I guess the question really would be what type of vulnerability?
That's a wonderful way to begin that conversation. Yes, I agree. So let me be the first one to answer this one. So, do pastors struggle with vulnerability? So, all of these questions are from suggested things that have come to me to make this episode. So, I don't think that it's a struggle. I think it's more of a how do we better handle it? And we can see vulnerability positively or negatively. Positively, you're being open to people and you're being willing to be an open slate for people to understand, like, okay, so this guy is human too. He goes through challenges and he goes through all sorts of different things like other regular people do,
Right.
because all of us are regular people. The negative connotation of vulnerability would be to where the pastor wants to put on a facade and he is covering something up. Now, unfortunately, because there are many men, and I'm going to say this honestly, there are many men who should not be pastors that are pastors. And that's evident in the way that it happens. Now, God, in His mercy and even in His justice, allows these men to do what they think they were called to do,
Right.
even only to one allow himself to be glorified, but also to let those men deal with their own consequences. And we have a lot of that in the news when pastors or men who claim to be pastors do not apply the word to themselves, but end up leading people to all sorts of pain and suffering, especially through SA or any other type of abusive behavior. So that's not the type of vulnerability that we're addressing here. I think pastors need to be vulnerable. Our children, especially for us, we have 3 boys, they need to know that it's okay to cry, but it's not okay to whine. There's a difference. Whining is just you're making a scene because you don't get your way. Crying because you get hurt, crying because you're emotionally exhausted, that's okay. It's when they go from dealing with true heavy emotions and they shift to whining simply because they're not getting their way that I have a problem. And I mean, even you even said it that I've become more of a softie over the years in the sense that if I see something that moves me emotionally, I'm not afraid of shedding a tear. I'm not afraid of, if I'm truly moved emotionally, to even cry with you or inside of you or the boys. But I am not just constantly breaking down because, oh, look, a leaf fell over and I break down crying. That's not what happens. I think vulnerability is not a struggle in the way of it's a negative. I think it's a struggle in the way of how do we show vulnerability in a good way that honors God, edifies our families, and also blesses our congregation. I think those things are positive when we entrust ourselves to the Lord and allow Him to use all of our weaknesses like Paul did, because that's the best thing to do.
Right. I think there is the potential to struggle with it in the sense that when it comes to things related to us, we tend to be more open. When it starts to filter over into things that are struggles or difficulties as related to the pastorate, I think the potential is there for you to struggle a little bit more with vulnerability because there's also the how much can I share
Hmm.
without breaking confidence, or I don't want to be burdensome at home for a thing that my wife cannot solve, obviously. And so keeping those boundaries while still being open and sharing what's on your heart, I think is where the vulnerability can be a little more difficult in navigating that. I think there was a period in time where neither of us wanted to be all that vulnerable with the other, but I think that went back to us sort of emotionally isolating ourselves out of protection.
Right,
And so we both had to be strong for the other.
right,
And we're failing to understand that the other person didn't get it. And so we weren't communicating and we were seeing vulnerability as somehow we weren't pulling our weight or helping in that situation, or we were going to be burdensome to the other, and we weren't leveling that off right. But I think it is possible for any pastor to struggle on some levels with vulnerability at home because there is this sense of I have to be strong, I have to be the leader, I can't burden my family with these things. And while there is a matter of confidence, that doesn't mean you can't come and tell me. And you have, you may not be able to say the details, but man, I had a meeting with someone today. Just pray for me. Sometimes you can let me know who, but you don't tell me what. Sometimes I get nothing other than I had some really tough meetings today. Just pray. There's a lot going on. And you'll share how that made you feel. So I think there's a way to balance that better, which I think you've learned over the years.
Yeah, a lot of that is going to be just practice and
Right.
godly wisdom that, again, we learn by engaging the word, being mentored by good men, and then just being surrounded by good couples in ministry, people who can mentor us and people with whom we can share life together. Okay, what rhythms keep communication strong? What are some good practices? That's the best way to put it. That keep good, healthy communication for you and for me in general.
I mean, really and truly, it starts at home. So we need to have good boundaries at home.
Yeah,
And that's good boundaries for ourselves and good boundaries with our kids.
yeah.
Our kids can't, as much as they may love to and want to, they can't be honest every minute of every day. We have to have time to ourselves to talk, to spend time together, whatever that looks like, even at home. Because let's face it, you can't go on a date night every single day,
Yeah.
right? As fun as that would be, and those times are important, it's not practical. There's still the day to day anyway that's going to happen, right? And we can't run away from that. And so, where do we put some of those boundaries in place to allow us those moments at home when we're both home together to have that time and also exemplify that to our children? Like, our world doesn't revolve around you. Our marriage comes first, and us being on the same spot then helps us help you. So, I'd say that's the primary thing. Some of those boundaries for both of us, like for me, it's, I have to set boundaries with the kids. I'm not at their beck and call, or it's boundaries with the housework. There's a time when it stops. For you, it would be, okay, I need to have some time and I have my boundary for myself, but then I have to be involved and make sure I'm involved in the family. I can't let people call me every minute of every day and I'm at the church's beck and call either, because there was a time when that was the case. It didn't matter what time it was. They could call you at 11 o'clock at night and you would answer. And it wasn't like, oh, that'll wait till tomorrow. No, I have to deal with it now. And so that's boundaries for you too, which you've learned, like, you know what? This can wait till tomorrow. So it's going to wait till tomorrow. So I think it's primarily keeping those boundaries at home first. And that's how we really keep that connection better and the communication better, because we're creating that structure from home where it's going to matter the most. And that's, I think, flows into a lot of the rest of our life.
I think everything you said is right. I think the biggest thing that I would define it is, again, thinking like a guy. So just be mindful of that. Concise, not too concise that it's not clear, but concise and clear, and also goal oriented and driven for me helps. So if I understand that all you want to gain from good communication is be heard, okay, that works. If you tell me you're actually working to a solution, that also helps me because I
Right.
know which goal I'm going for. Am I just listening so you can process, or are we listening together so that we can say, well, this is the path forward?
Right.
Because that also works in the way of how we do things at the church. We always hear intentionally, intently. We also want to ensure that if people are being entrusted to lead, that we can hear and give some feedback, or if we are being asked to step in as the decision maker, that we can listen, weigh all the options, and then talk and give that directive. The other thing that helps a lot is understanding this. We can give grace when we make mistakes.
Right.
And it's hard because we want to get it right the first time, especially our personality types. But we make mistakes, and it
Right.
helps when we can say openly and expect it openly, hey, I made a mistake. I'm sorry.
Right.
Or hey, you said this. I think you may have been mistaken. Is that correct? Because if we are able to do that, then it is easier to avoid bigger fights and bigger arguments or miscommunications and definitely hurt feelings.
Yeah. I think the other thing that helps is knowing our own limit. Like, there are times where we know we need to talk about something or have communication, but neither of us are in the right headspace to do it. We're tired, we're stressed out from something. And unless it's a life and death sort of thing, I think it also helps helps us to know, like, hey, you know what? We're just too tired to have a reasonable conversation about this right now, whatever it is. And it might not be a big thing, it might be minor, to something we need to like talk about.
Right.
But we also know when we're both really tired or stressed out, it lends itself to the temptation to end up being misunderstood or defensive or lead to an argument unnecessarily. And so I think also understanding those boundaries of, I understand we need to talk about this, but right now is not the time. Let's put a pin in it and agree to address it later. I think that's probably where more of our struggle comes from now than being unable to talk, is recognizing, as I think especially for me, because my brain doesn't get to shut off and I have a hard time shutting it off. I feel like I need resolution before I can relax. And you are more like, let me relax and then I will find resolution. I need to get over there.
And if resolution never comes, it never comes.
And I struggle with that. And so that's something I think I specifically have needed to learn, like, this is not the time to deal with it. And to be okay with getting the answer, like, look, I can't deal with this right now. I'm too tired or you're too tired. Let's talk about it at a later time. And I have to be able to like deal with that answer.
Yeah.
And that is something I am actively learning.
That's your resolution.
It's okay.
It's
to
a semicolon.
Yes.
I like that. I like that. All right. So we're going to transition then now. We've talked about emotional awareness and how to deal with these things. So the final segment for this particular time together is going to be on friendships and guardrails. And so the first question is, how do we handle opposite sex friendships wisely?
I think for the most part, we've been pretty good about that for most of our relationship, even before you were in the pastorate, because we recognized your calling and what you were going to go into. And so we wanted to set some of those boundaries in place anyway. And I think just out of general respect for each other and being sure to avoid even the appearance of temptation or inappropriate anything or wrongdoing, I think we've generally been more mindful of that. I think that has only grown as we've gone in ministry because, unfortunately, of many of the things we have seen, people we have either known personally or just known about, where they have had those issues, whether they truly did something wrong because they let their guardrails down or there was too many questions and it still created an issue. I think we've been more and more careful about that. I know for the most part, you and I, when we talk to someone of the opposite sex, we convey that. Hey, I talked to so and so today. It's not a big thing. We don't have a big powwow about it, but we're just aware. I think it's harder for you than it is for me because you do deal in the realm of sort of confidentiality and counseling. But what you have done and what we did talk about is when you're in those moments or when those moments might happen, they're always in a place where you're never secluded and alone. There's always the ability for there to be witnesses to see things. Most often in places like the church or others, we have cameras. So there's accountability for you and for others. Like the other elders too can be in just as a vulnerable position. It's not only you.
Right.
Or, hey, I'm meeting with so-and-so. We're going out to a public place for lunch to discuss this meeting or whatever, and they're the opposite sex. And it's not something I need to necessarily be at, but you are communicating, I had this meeting with so-and-so. And for me, it would be generally the same thing. I talked to this person at church. We had this conversation. I think the thing that gets hard is social media because people do communicate a lot that way and there's a lot of potential for misuse. Generally speaking, I don't friend men. Very rarely do I have men as friends, but they're also joint friends with you. If I do at all, I don't have guy friends that aren't also people you would know. But for the most part, I don't at all. And not because I dislike them or anything. I just feel like I'm trying to be extra appropriate in who I have. And I don't feel the need to do that. There's not much I would talk with them about anyway. And so it just avoids an issue altogether. And I think for you, it's very similar. Not that you don't have a lot of your church members are your friends. And so it's a way you can connect with them. But none of that's hidden. I get to know all of it.
Right.
And so that provides that safeguard for you.
Right. And so I think for me is intentional openness. So we've mentioned before that there's windows that you can see from a hallway. You don't hear anything that's happening. The door is glass, a glass door. So there's never, there can be privacy, but not seclusion. And so there's that. The other thing is you know who all my friends of the opposite sex are.
Right.
And these are mostly people who are either members in the church when they come in, again, open view and disclosure, but also when there's times where I have conversations with them, we talk about it. And again, it all comes back to the intention of that friendship.
Right.
And speaking to that effect is where pastors have ended up in an affair or pastors have ended up in something criminal because it may not have started that way, but because there's no safety rails to keep them away from that, it ended up going that way. And so being very aware of that. And number one, I love what I do. Number two, I love my family. I love you. You're my wife. And number three, don't very much like the idea of having to go through a court process or, God forbid, go to jail. So with that in mind, there's the wisdom of, say, for example, one of our oldest friends, and I hope she may be watching this episode later, Michelle. She and I used to work together at in the university where we graduated from with a bachelor's, and she and I used to do a lot of work together. But every time that we were together and going to and from or doing whatever, you knew,
Right.
and you and her became good friends. And even until she got married to her husband Eddie, and now they live in Mississippi, I believe. There's always this idea of, oh well, I talked to so and so today, and this
Right.
is the gist of the conversation. That's two things that help. Number one, openness in the way we conduct business. Two, openness in our friendships. Three, it's also discretion, and by that I mean this: she has access to my cell phone because I have nothing to hide.
Well, we have access to each other is
She's
more
not
accurate, but yeah.
she's not the only person who has access to my cell phone. My ministry assistant has access to my cell phone. The reason being is that she's the wife of one of my elders, and any of the devices that we utilize for the work of ministry, which is a computer, iPad, phone, whatever, if I need to hide something, there's a bigger problem.
Right.
And the best thing to do is to have an openness about the way we do ministry so that if anything is being perceived as inappropriate, somebody can say something and safeguard us. Because again, if we say that we love the Lord, we need to be able to also love and receive correction.
Right.
My wife corrects me when I step out of line. She does it out of love. She does not do it like a mother to a child. She does it like a partner in this marriage, and vice versa. So I think for us, those are the things that help us have friendships of the opposite gender in a healthy way.
Well, and I think that's where there's also just a lot of discernment. You're in a particularly unique position where people share intimate things with
Right.
you, their emotions, things that are going on in their family life, things that may be really, really tough and make them more emotionally vulnerable. And unfortunately, where a lot of pastors can get themselves into trouble is they get too involved in that and they don't use discernment in either bringing in another party in order to ensure that there's a safeguard in those conversations, or they lack the ability to see that that person may be emotionally vulnerable and sort of attaching themselves in an inappropriate way.
Right.
And that creates an issue. And when pastors' wives reverse could be true, the husband could be so involved, he's neglecting his wife, right?
Right.
And so she may then feel, off to the side and lonely and not safeguard herself in that area. But there's this discernment of, there are some people that you can't spend time with.
Right.
There are some people, certain conversations don't happen alone because there is this vulnerability that could happen that could put you in a compromising position. And it's okay to say no to that. Or, what, we need to bring in somebody else. Or my wife needs to be here for this conversation. Or whatever that situation would look like. You have to also be very discerning in this person we cannot have this conversation with alone because there's too many issues or emotions involved that could lend itself to inappropriate ideas, maybe only on that one person, but sometimes that's all it takes is one
Right.
person to get the wrong idea, right? And so that may be you know what, I'm praying for you. I'm not the person to talk to you about this with or
Right.
something.
So, and I think that also moves us into the non-negotiables for this. So, for example, for me, the non-negotiables is we're not going to go to some secluded place to meet, whether it's
Mhm.
a man or a woman, because I
Right.
mean, there's plenty of cases where even pastors are accused by other men, so we don't want to do that. There's also the note taking. So, for example, in our software for church management, we try to enter notes when something that is counseling related takes place. So the elders know this is what happened, this is who we met with, this is when it happened.
Right.
And it's also just good just for taking care of the flock. And another thing is just being open with you. It's one of those boundaries. Like if I feel that like I cannot tell you something about me meeting with someone, that's already a red enough flag for me to know, like, okay, maybe that's not the best course of action.
Right.
And a lot of that, number one, you're taught that in seminary, especially by good men who have been pastors. Number one. Number two, you also learn from someone else's mistakes. Pastors that you and I both respect and love dearly, that we have seen in the last 5 years fall to a number of scandals, whether it's money related, SA related, or just inappropriate behavior in communication related, that we do not ever want to be put in that situation.
Right.
Number one, it brings dishonor to Christ's name. Number two, it brings reproach on the church. And number three, it also can destroy our family. And we
Right.
really don't want to do that.
Right.
What are some of the non negotiables for you?
I think the biggest non-negotiables are I don't ever meet with any man alone. I'm always in a place where it's public, it's open, you're around or someone else is around. There's an accountability of some kind. Like I said, I already limit my social media and who I interact with. It's very, very strict. Mostly because I'm not on it enough anyway, really, to have
Yeah,
any friends, to be honest. But I don't have. I feel like if I can't talk to the wife, why would I need to talk to the husband?
right.
And in those cases, I would be bringing you into it. And I think that's really just the other non-negotiable. It doesn't really matter how benign the conversation may seem. I let you know, hey, I talked with so-and-so about this today, and this is what they told me. Generally speaking, the wives are usually ones who come talk to me anyway.
Right.
And if it's a male that has a question, 9 times out of 10, it's, let's go talk to you. Go find him. I don't know the answer. Which people thankfully respond to here really well. They don't expect me to have all the answers, which is great. So it's usually, I don't know, go talk to him. He's been in charge of that. So I think those are probably the biggest non-negotiables. I don't ever have a reason to go meet a guy, someone, whether they're one of my friend's husbands or not, alone. I never have that reason. I don't
And if
even
we
have a
do, it's
reason.
together.
Right. And I don't even have a reason really to text them or texting them, or I'm texting their wife, not them. In fact, most of the phone numbers I have are women, not men. Very few men's phone numbers I have at all. I can maybe count three, I think, in my head right now.
Right.
And at least two of those I think are family members. So
There you
it's
go.
totally different. So I think those are the biggest ones for me.
Yeah. Well, I think to finish this episode on this note is being above reproach. And what does that look like
Right.
in ministry? If you feel like you cannot tell your wife or your elders about it and not create some sort of conflict or problem or just raise questions, probably not the best course of action. Second, to be above reproach is not just for your reputation alone. Remember that we represent Christ.
Right.
And we must be able to, without any type of shame, say, I am doing everything for the glory of God. And that takes discernment, intentionality, but it also takes a keen awareness of where your own sinfulness is. And why do I say that? It's because you and I, as men who are called to lead the church, we have different pitfalls. For some of us, it's going to be anger. For some of us, it could be lust. For some of us, it could be greed. And for some of us, it could be any other number of sins. So knowing that will then, know that there are certain things you don't need to be exposed to because that's where your sinfulness lies. So if your sinfulness is lust, alone with your computer and iPad or iPhone, not the best thing. If anger is your sin of choice, that's what you're given to, then being mindful not to say something unkind or being mindful that you need time to process that. Those are just examples. Greed, hey, there's a rule. I don't touch money. Not because I have that's a sin, a given sin to me, but rather because I want to be above reproach and people should never see me handle any money on behalf of the church. And if I do, it's for an official purpose that the elders know about. But not just, oh, well, let me count the money and the checks and let me see who gave and how much they gave. Yeah, that's a big no. So above reproach means everything as much as it is within your power, brother, bring honor to Christ. Even
Right.
if it means that it looks innocent on the surface, like maybe giving someone a gift, the best thing to do is to be mindful of how that could be perceived. And if it's going to be perceived as something inappropriate, think of a different course of action.
Yeah. And I think the same thing applies to pastors' wives. You're in a position generally that's more seen, more prominent. Some people latch on to that type of authority-ish type of figure or someone they can confide in. And so there's a lot of discernment in that and keeping those barriers. And also being aware of what's going on with your husband because he's even much more of a vulnerable position than you are.
Hmm.
And so sometimes you can see things from the outside looking in and say, hey, and I've even told him this, like, hey, I know you didn't mean anything by this. but you know, you might, I don't think it's been here. I think it was somewhere else. You might want to be careful with this situation because this person could take it a different way, or this person, I may know that they're struggling with something and he may not know that yet,
Right.
right? Or whatever that is. Or just, hey, be mindful because people could view it this way. And so he's like, you know what, and sometimes it's not even ill will. And that's something I think you learn to think ahead on. But sometimes you're just doing business as usual and you're not seeing it from an outside perspective. And so it helps you to be reminded, oh, you know what, you're right. And as time goes on, I think that comes naturally. But I also think there needs to be this encouragement of not being ashamed because something happens. Because as much as we could do everything right, we don't get to control other people.
Right.
And they may put us in a position that feels awkward. And so I think that's also being proactive in saying and telling people right away, look, this happened. I dealt with it this way, but I want to make sure X, Y, and Z is aware. So it's not becoming an issue later. And we take safeguards, we bring other people like the elders
Yeah.
or the wife in, and you as the wife not automatically assuming the worst and helping him have those safeguards. And hopefully he's being honorable in that,
Right.
where you're not feeling like you are lacking trust, but and also, okay, well, this situation happened. Now we know this is a person you cannot deal with alone because they put you in this position. We bring the elders in, we bring these safeguards so then everyone is aware and can help manage that to further protect him. Or the reverse could be true for yourself. If a male were to put you in that position, my first thing is I tell him, hey, this happened. I dealt with it this way, but you need to know because this is going to be an issue and we can't have that happening, right?
Correct.
So I think just keeping things really open, almost going overboard in order to ensure that there's not any concern about anything hiding or even looking sort of odd. It's not necessary. If you're sharing life together, you should be able to share it all, right?
That's right.
So
One flesh. Well, I am Carlos Garduño. This is Catherine, my wife, and this is Disciple Makers. We'll see you for the conclusion of this series. See you soon.